The names of the galactic kings who ruled over innumerable planets with an iron grip were whispered. Were legends immortal, unbeatable, and unattainable by anything or anyone? The idea of their strength made civilizations around the galaxy shudder, as their fleets could destroy entire systems under a single leadership, and their armies were a formidable force that no one dared to oppose. The monarchs were not merely in a universe that had never experienced any other kind of government. Conquerors were the pinnacle of power. Without opposition, they had grown their empires for decades, putting down uprisings and absorbing whole. They ruled over the stars, and their influence could be felt everywhere in space. With technologies far beyond what a normal mortal could understand, nothing could ever touch them. The kings possessed more than just military force. They also possessed power that was simply unfathomable to those outside their ranks. Refined their rule by scheming, gathering information, and monitoring every aspect of their. Every dissident was put down under surveillance of the empire before they could even consider organizing, although in the calm areas, something was stirring between the stars, where even the kings believed they had achieved total domination. This force was different from the abrupt emergence of a new enemy or the development of another galactic empire. Whatever the kings had ever seen was neither big nor accompanied by an army. Rather, it was something much more terrible. A single entity that appears as a shadow from a little Earth is an inconsequential planet that is so far from the galactic stage that the kings hardly acknowledged it, much less believed that this mysterious Earthling could pose a threat. Sprung from Earth's ancient traditions and possessed a power that the cosmic kings were unable to, being a master of stealth and a practitioner of the age-old discipline of ninjutsu, this person struck without a sacrifice. The Earth ninjas were not a force of raw power, warning without leaving a trace. Being a living example of accuracy, patience, and stillness, the ninjas had technology to match the kings. Had spent years honing techniques that would make him nearly imperceptible to even the most advanced surveillance systems. He didn't have to fight the kings directly, since he knew that the real weapon was the systems they had. The kings were not involved in the invisible action and silent actions that left nothing but disaster in their wake. They had destroyed entire civilizations, wiped off species that dared to rebel, and were used to being caught off guard. Wiped out anybody who dared to oppose their might? A lone ninja from a primitive world was nothing more than a joke or curiosity, but they quickly discovered that their first and most deadly mistake was underestimating this Earthling. The first strike of the ninja was a subtle, unannounced blackout spanning entire fleets that disappeared into thin air, a mystery disappearance of high-ranking captains, and a crucial galactic hub. The king's generals frantically searched for solutions, but they were unable to find any. The galaxy's most sophisticated fleets had just left behind debris, dead, and survivors. It was 10% more powerful than the monarch still failed to recognize the magnitude of the danger they were accustomed to defeating. In order to combat this adversary, didn't retaliate in the traditional sense. Instead, the ninja moved, and there were no battles or clashing armies. Like a shadow, the kings first stealthily destroyed their empire piece by piece, were contemptuous of their haughtiness, which sprang from decades of uncontested legal. People to think that this enigmatic murder was really an isolated incident, but the sabotage persisted in a crucial way. Without firing a shot, a fleet was annihilated, and a military post vanished. Nothing made sense, and the kings realized that the ninja were using a strategy rather than merely attacking. Wasn't just randomly destroying targets. Each move had a purpose. Target was valuable as the king's complacency started to crumble due to the dead toll. They were unable to overlook the issue any longer. The Earth Ninja wasn't just some renegade warrior from another planet, simply attacking. He was engaging in a game that the kings weren't ready for, and with each move, the ninja displayed a profound. Being aware of the king's shortcomings, he was able to combat them without having to confront them directly. He was unconstrained by their arrogance, dependence on technology, and ignorance of the actual power of terror. He worked covertly, taking advantage of the honor or war principles that the monarchs had established to keep power. Tiniest weaknesses and eliminating their authority without ever facing them head-on, it became evident that Earthling has a far simpler and far more straightforward objective than to conquer or govern the galaxy. More perilous. He intended to demolish the Galactic King's empire by peace. Disregarding traditional warfare, he was a ghost that moved between the gaps and their barriers. Taking advantage of their conceit and indulgence, the king started to sense something they had never felt: dread. Not the fear of a fleet or the terror of an army amassing on the horizon. Something was comparable to theirs. It was the fear of an invisible adversary who disregarded the law. Having shown that this was not a foe they could defeat with brute force or simply outwit with their superior technology, the ninjas represented something more terrible than simply being an opponent. The brittleness of the empire they had spent decades constructing, and the vulnerability of the mighty with each assault, ninjas eroded their sense of invincibility, revealing the straightforward reality that the Galactic Kings were not as impregnable as they had previously thought. In the bowels of their kingdom, in the invisible gaps between their dominions, the shadows had managed to retaliate, and the Earth Ninja was a formidable force. The Galactic Kings have never seen a single figure who appeared to be exempt from the rules of combat. He was brought up in the shadow of ancient traditions and schooled from an early age to become proficient in conventional warfare. His training in the most hostile conditions gave him the skill of stealth and accuracy, making him a weapon of unmatched talent and unwavering discipline. Every motion and breath was practiced. In a society dominated by overpowering forces, he lived by a code that prioritized subtlety and silence. The ninja's greatest strength was his ability to stay invisible and unheard from the very beginning, despite his strength and technology. At first, his reasons were unclear. The Earth Ninja wasn't motivated by a thirst for power or a desire for indifference. His quest for stardom was a silent vengeance with deep roots that was personal. In the past, he wanted to dismantle rather than control or conquer, the same framework that the Galactic Kings had established, not by brute force, but by meticulous, deliberate attacks that would use all of their sophisticated technologies and enormous resources to gradually dismantle their empire. Fleets had never thought about how a single warrior may undermine their operational supremacy, believing that they were untouchable and that no one person could endanger them because of their immense authority. However, the ninja was more than just an assassin. He was a master of strategy who knew how to take advantage of even the smallest weaknesses. He was aware of the king's flaws in the system, even if they were powerful. Shortcomings they had long ignored because they were unable to see them, and the ninja would use his abilities beyond the realm of the physical, and his intelligence was unmatched by his capacity to move covertly, was as formidable, and the ninja realized that strength alone would not suffice to vanquish the Galactic Kings, or ability to outsmart them and take advantage of their conceit and complacency. The monarchs had grown so used to their own dominance that they were unable to foresee the danger of a single people. With SLE may pretend that they are overly dependent on technology. The ninja were aware that they are overly reliant on their fleets and overconfident in their own invulnerability. That their sense of control and the ninja's capacity to stay in control were the true enemies, not their army. His plan revolved around staying undiscovered by utilizing his abilities, cunning, and in-depth knowledge of the city. He was able to compromise systems and disrupt activities in his immediate surroundings without leaving any evidence. Didn't have to fight the king's army directly. Instead, he targeted their infrastructure, supply lines, and their discreet, effective, and unexpected leadership. The ninja didn't need to be visible to have an effect. His presence was deliberate, and every assault was planned. Sensing in the commotion he brought about and the mayhem that ensued after him, it didn't take long for the kings to start acknowledge that something was occurring, but they were unable to fully comprehend the magnitude of the threat. They first believed that these assaults were the consequence of a few isolated instances, or possibly the effort of a small rebel group. But when the ninja attacks persisted, it became evident that a much more deliberate strategy was involved. High-ranking officials were killed while entire systems were in disarray, and there was no indication of the perpetrator. Precise accuracy that leaves no traces behind, the kings used to destroying any danger in their way, and they were unprepared for an adversary that worked in the background and didn't follow the rules of the invader. The longer they pursued the offender, the more elusive the ninja became in their advanced combat skills. Monitoring systems, their troops, and their fleets of warships were unable to follow him because he knew how to avoid being discovered. He didn't require the advanced technology that the kings had in order to blend in with the galaxy's fabric. He employed something far simpler, the arc of invisibility, to govern their dominion. His moves were such the galaxy's most potent being was so silent and precise that nobody even knew where to look. The very creators of an empire that spanned innumerable worlds came to our aid in order to combat this. Invisible threat, the ninja steeds started to reverberate across the galaxy, where the kings used to rule. Total authority, their empire started to exhibit symptoms of stress. Fleets were without a single shot being fired, military bases were destroyed, and damaged communication connections were cut off. The monarchs, who had previously been used to violently quelling uprisings, suddenly found themselves in a situation where they had never been in before, and they were losing to a shadow rather than an army. The more the kings attempted to strike back, the more they understood how serious their error was. This was no typical killing kill. This warrior, an assassin, had turned the entire cosmos into his battlefield. Who was much more familiar with its rhythms and patterns than any of them, the ninja didn't require a fleet or an army. He used planning and silence as his weapons, and he did it with accuracy. Each blow and attack served as a move in a bigger game, and the kings, they were losing because they were so conceited, not even seeing how the ninja's strategy contrasted sharply with Cafus Renos. Because of the manner the kings had conducted themselves throughout their rule, they were accustomed to forcing their will on others, to using overwhelming force to demonstrate their dominance. But the ninja didn't have to force anything. He just took, taking away what was most important to them, their sense of security and control. He made the Galactic Kings confront something they had grown so accustomed to that they had never really thought about vulnerability, their own superiority, that they had never envisioned a rival capable of undermining them in such a pernicious way. The Earth Ninja's silent way didn't aim to kill them outright. Instead, he just wanted to demonstrate to them that no empire, no matter how big, was impregnable. The ninjas revealed the weaknesses with every attack. They were unaware of the holes in the king's armor, so he didn't have to engage them in combat on their terms. Demonstrated to them that their strength was not as unbreakable as they had thought, and that the ninja's legacy was not one of combat, but actually became possible through the systematic unrest. He had shown to them the real nature of the silent devastation of an empire that had become complacent in its power. Expensive conceit, the galactic kings that ruled over enormous empires, that numerous systems had always believed that nothing could harm them because their technology and armies were superior, is incomprehensible to the majority of species, and to them, the concept of a single species' absolute dominance it seemed absurd that a single person from a primitive world like Earth could actually pose a threat because they had put down uprisings, destroyed civilizations, and bravely faced all forms of opposition because they believed they were untouchable. The universe's supreme overlords. But as stories of mysterious, bizarre disappearances began to surface, disturbances and senior officials disappearing without a trace, the king's trust initially started to erode. Rejected the incidences as one-off occurrences and small issues that could be resolved by their resources. Some proposed a bug in their V, while others said it was the product of unhappy rebels. Networks, but the attacks continued because they were too calculated and accurate to be the outcome. By coincidence, entire fleets were destroyed, military fortresses were demolished, and without any indication of resistance, advanced infrastructure was sabotaged. There were no large-scale conflicts or explosions, only the uncanny lack of generals and advisors who had previously served as the king's representatives, searched every area of their empire using their most sophisticated monitoring technologies, but they were unable to identify the offender. Stayed elusive, appearing more like a phantasm than a living entity. As the situation worsened, the king's haughtiness started to give way, and the adversary became uneasy. They had disregarded this opponent so readily because it was not a power they could directly face. Overwhelmed with superior numbers or technology, whoever the adversary was struck when and where the kings were most vulnerable, operating from the shadows. The longer the attacks lasted, the more. It became clear that this was a planned destruction of their empire rather than a straightforward killing campaign. The king's biggest concern was not that they would lose a battle to this unidentified force, but rather that they had no notion how to defend themselves, as their empire was based on dominance over the belief that they could watch every sector, follow every action, and eliminate any potential threat before it could acquire momentum. But they were now up against a foe who disregarded all of their expectations. This opponent didn't operate in the open and didn't need weapons or armies to wreak havoc. The king's anxiety increased with every fresh assault. They lost confidence and were uncertain of their own safety, that their hitherto unassailable power was being undermined, not by an outside force, and that their rule would endure unopposed, but by one person who appeared to transcend their reach. The kings started to turn against one another, with each king accusing the other of being responsible for the unexplained attacks on their unity. They were accustomed to holding the reins of power, but a pillar of their strength started to crumble. They were now frantically attempting to figure out how to regain the authority they had always assumed for granted, but no amount of military power or simple fixes could quite fix it. The issue may be resolved by technological progress. The ninja didn't require an army, didn't want enormous fleets or abundant resources. All he needed was his understanding and his capacity to stay undetectable in the face of such an adversary. For the first time during their lengthy reign, the kings saw that their empire was powerless, even with the most powerful powers. Wasn't quite as impervious as they had thought. They had supposed that anyone, not even a warrior from a little Earth, a minor planet, could never be a major threat, but the ninja had revealed the vulnerability, their dependence on technology, their arrogance, and their conviction that they could dominate everything. They were now engaged in a battle of dread rather than one of overwhelming numbers or sheer force, of weakness and a lack of command, and they were clueless about how to prevail. The kings attempted to retaliate in kind as the raids persisted, sending their finest troops to find this enigmatic foe, only to observe as they repeatedly failed the ninja, ever snapping a bee as if he knew exactly what he was doing. He always seemed to be one step ahead. When they believed they had him surrounded, he slipped and showed them how to play the game and exploit their weaknesses. Their greatest attempts were unsuccessful due to their hold, and their fear increased with each failed attempt. The kings, so accustomed to ruling their realm, were losing the galaxy that had once been theirs. The people who were afraid of the unknown, the ninja, had now turned into the tables in ways they never would have imagined, and the formerly held dominance was suddenly in jeopardy not because they didn't believe in their own power to defeat the other Golems. Despite their military defeats, they were unable to see that their empire was founded on a basis of illusion. They thought they were unbeatable, but the ninja had revealed to them that no empire, no matter how strong, can withstand the silence. The kings were paying for the annihilation of those who knew how to take advantage of its weaknesses, because they were too blind to notice it. The cost: the Galactic kings had experienced war before, but what they now had to deal with was something for which they were unable to prepare. and the lone man had turned into an epidemic. The kings had attempted all means to eradicate the unstoppable force from their dominion, from dispatching elite squads to search every area of the galaxy for ways to implement their most cutting-edge technologies, but none of them were successful. Every time they believed they were winning, the ninjas vanished once more, leaving only mayhem and devastation in their wake. There were no tactics or strategies they could utilize at his wake that could stop him. He had unparalleled talent and stealth, and he appeared to be everywhere at once, destroying their enemies. The monarch's once great military force was being weakened piece by piece, and without a single significant warfare on a large scale. Their fleets were methodically destroyed, not via direct fight, but through communication between smaller groups who didn't speak the same language. When precision hit their weak areas, they suddenly found themselves powerless. Regardless of how many times they attempted to find this elusive threat, but they were never successful since the ninjas' maneuvers were too well planned. Each hit had a purpose, and each choice was a component of a bigger scheme. And at first they had laughed at the idea that nobody, not even the kings themselves, understood the finale. Imagine a single individual overthrowing such a large empire after all the galactic kings had dominated for eons, becoming more powerful every year until they felt their supremacy was unwavering. They have subdued species, destroyed entire universes, and any danger to their authority. It was ludicrous to think that one person from Earth could overthrow their supremacy, but here they were. Even as their authority started to elude them, the king's first attempts at counterattack had been futile. They used all of their resources, dispatched legions of men, and launched their most powerful ships at the issue. They did, but it was all for nothing because the ninja avoided using traditional warfare because he didn't need to. Instead of using troops or one-on-one battles, they used a universal mechanism to inflict pain on whichever people they wanted. He relied on something much more efficient in his knowledge of tactics. His intelligence and his awareness of the king's own conceit, he was happy to destroy their authority covertly, piece by piece, without engaging in direct confrontation. They didn't even understand how or why each time the kings dispatched a fleet to hunt down the ninja, they returned without finding any. Their warriors were losing faith in the ninja because they were seeing ships destroyed or crippled in ways they couldn't explain. They believed that their superior forces and advanced technologies might be readily destroyed by someone who knew how to take advantage of their deficiencies, because the king's strategies were insufficient and they were unable to depend on their typical techniques of dominance because they were unable to comprehend their adversaries. The more ninja evaded they were, the more king's anxiety increased, and the fact that they could no longer rely on their own citizens due to the attacks made matters worse. As time went on, it became apparent that their opponents and allies were not clearly separated. There were suspicions that the ninja had infiltrated their own military, and there were whispers of dissatisfaction among their ranks. Mistrust and paranoia. How could they defend themselves when they were unsure of whom to believe and who remained faithful, who had already been transformed? The king's feeling of invulnerability was broken, and their empire started to falter, transforming what was once a massive, cohesive force into a shattered leaders in our own time. Leaders of the weaker entities started betraying one another, accusing one another of being increasingly unable of stopping the crisis. The unity that had previously given the king such power was now a problem because even when things went well for the principal leaders, the exhibit manifested power started to falter, transforming what was once a massive, cohesive force into a shattered leadership. Some people thought they should give up on finding the ninja completely. Others, however, insisted on starting even bigger efforts in an attempt to impose an increasingly improbable win. Yet despite their best efforts, the ninja's shadow persisted. At this moment, the king's empire started to genuinely fall apart. The ninjas caused psychological as well as physical harm. They were once unstoppable. Forces were now dispersed, discouraged, and unsure of their capacity to frighten, to control, had been totally demolished. And the ninja had demonstrated to them that even the strongest, quiet, subtle disturbance may bring tyrants to their knees. Before they realized they had miscalculated their enemy, it was too late. And their empire's foundations had already starting to fall apart. The monarchs had to confront the unsettling reality that they were not unbeatable. Instead, they had depended on their might, technology, and, for so long, they were overwhelmed by numbers that they had forgotten how to handle anything as elusive and crafty as the ninja's conceit and sense of superiority had caused them to lose sight of the one thing that could undermine their own susceptibility, which was never the purpose of the ninja's acts. Open conflict, but instead of using brute force for the conceptual destruction of the kings, he had subtly poisoned their minds and made them think that at last they had won. He had shown the holes in their armor due to their dependence on technology and their incapacity to adjust, and with each the kings were being torn apart by one ninja, not an army. After the ninja's precise strike drove them closer to the brink, lone character, an expert in cunning and strategy who recognized the actual nature of power, the king's last efforts to save their collapsing kingdom, they had to resort to ever unpredictable, desperate measures. Strategies to strengthen their defenses, but all of that was futile because the ninja had already defeated them, and it was no longer the goal of beating the kings in combat was to demonstrate to them that despite their belief in their own might, believing that if one person knew the arc of deconstructing power, they could still be undone. Ultimately, the ninja's greatest triumph came not from taking over worlds or destroying fleets, but rather from demonstrating the Galactic King's empire's final weakness. They had ruled for ages before being overthrown, not by coercion, but by the silent, purposeful acts of a single guy who understood how to take advantage of every vulnerability. For ages, the Galactic King's kingdom was virtually unstoppable. Sprawled across the stars, their fleets and armies unparalleled in their utter power, nothing had ever seriously threatened their hegemony. They had put down uprisings, absorbed civilizations, and destroyed everyone who dared to oppose their might. Their power was legendary, and they had long believed it was impregnable. But the appearance of a lone ninja from a planet that had been forgotten altered everything. This was a battle, not a conflict with troops or weapons. In ideologies, a conflict between the assurance of ultimate power and the initial delicate force of disruption. The ninja was dismissed by the kings as a bother and a minor participant in the game because they did not perceive him as a genuine threat. How could one man, particularly from a backwater planet like Earth, confront them in the vast scheme of their empire? However, as time passed, the ninja's moves became more deliberate and bold. His blows were subtle yet powerful, focusing not only on the Niobe ships or military bases, but the king's entire power structure was undermined altogether. Their empire's internal unity started to break down, with once loyal leaders turning against one another. Fear of not knowing who to trust swept through the ranks, and it became evident that the kings had no solutions or means of halting the silent storm that was brewing inside their own empire. The kings had become so dependent on their military prowess and technical superiority that they had forgotten. The fundamental idea of power is that it's not only about what you can see or control, but also about what you can't. Anticipate the ninja's stealthy movements. Working with a deep understanding of their system, each action he took was calculated, and each assault was intended to take advantage of their overconfidence and complacency. As the kings became more aware that they were not up against a conventional adversary, they faced a force that functioned outside their comprehension of power, which made the reason ninja was so dangerous wasn't simply his skill. It was also his strategy, which he avoided using. Direct conflict, understanding that he would never be able to defeat the kings in a straight fight. Instead, he manipulated their flaws against them. Therefore, he didn't require large armies or warship fleets. Just had to destroy their kingdom from within, undermining their faith in their own ninja methods. Realized that an empire's true power does not come from the size of its army or the potency of its weaponry. However, in its capacity to uphold authority and inspire dread, and that's where the kings had fallen short. They had turned into complacent and overconfident in their own superiority as the attacks persisted. As kings' trust started to falter, their once unquestioned authority was being replaced by an increasing sense of tyranny. However, the ninja appeared to be one step ahead of them in every attempt to reestablish order. Their efforts to increase their force levels or consolidate their control simply revealed new weaknesses in the empire, most of them Duncans, and most of these include the memorial walls. Internal strife within their ranks increased, started to disintegrate, casting doubt on the king's own leadership in a system based on fear and control that was a deadly flaw. And the more the kings attempted to defend themselves, the more they understood that they were engaged in combat. Couldn't win. It wasn't due to superior tactics or firepower. Rather, it was the test of justice, and the battle of wills realized something that the kings did not. The real test of power is not how much you can destroy, but how much can you erode without anybody noticing. The king's empire had always depended on deception, of invulnerability, the notion that since the ninja had complete control over everything, nobody could oppose them, had dispelled that delusion, exposing a more profound reality. Even the most mighty empire can be overthrown by the silent persistence of a single, resolute person. The king's demise did not fall within their initiated authority to punish the problem. The king's presence did not ward away the destruction, also through the gradual disintegration of their dominion. True power is the capacity to adapt in order to remain unseen, not the possession of dominance, when required, and to take advantage of people's weaknesses who are overconfident in their own talents by the dominion was once the pinnacle of invincibility. But by the time the kings grasped the full extent of their defeat, it was too late, had been diminished to a shattered, disjointed remnant of its former existence. The ninja had not triumphed by force, but the Galactic kings left behind a legacy of unquestionable strength through the art of subdued disturbance. He was also a warning that the ninja can be defeated with nothing by even the strongest kings. However, his expertise and comprehension of their shortcomings had revealed their worst weakness, which was the conviction that the kings were invulnerable and had never imagined that something so subtle and basic could bring them to their knees. Yet ultimately, that's precisely what occurred. The empire they had established, with all of its might and technology, had fallen apart due to a guy lurking in the shadows serves as a warning that no empire is completely impervious to attack.